What's up guys, it's David, and it's kind of crazy, but we're already halfway through 2017, and that means it's time for me to do my top 20 albums of 2017 so far. I'm gonna get right into the list, but first I want to quickly run through my top 5 favorite EPs of the year. At the end of the year, I'll probably do a whole separate video just for like top 10 or top 15 favorite EPs, but right now there's just not that many out there to make a full list, so I'm just gonna quickly run down my top 5, and number 5 would be 13 by Denzel Curry, number 4 is Duster's Lament by Yucky Dusters, number 3 is Accelerator by Paul White and Danny Brown, number 2 is Steroids, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Gabber by Death Grips, and at number 1 is No Plan by David Bowie. But so you guys can check out those EPs if you want, but anyways, let's get right into the albums now. At number 20, I have Greatest Hits by Remo Drive. This right here, this is emo music done right. I can't say I'm too familiar with the emo scene, but that's mainly because 95% of what I do hear from the genre, it sucks. Because it seems like most bands, they just take all the worst aspects from the genre and use that. But Remo Drive, they're taking all the best parts of the genre on this record, Their vocals aren't too clean or whiny, there's definitely a raw edge to them. They play more towards an indie rock sound, and their lyrics are pretty self-aware. They don't take themselves too seriously. Every song on this record is memorable, it's catchy, and these guys aren't reinventing the wheel when it comes to emo music. But since they execute it so well and most other music I hear from this genre sucks, this record definitely stood out. It's a really solid album. At number 19, I have Process by Sampha. I first heard Sampha when he was featured on The Life of Pablo, but he really grabbed my attention when I heard his single Blood on Me. It's because of that song that I checked out this album, and I'm glad that I did. If there's one weak thing about this record though, it's that 2 of the songs, Take Me Inside and What Shouldn't I Be, are very dull and they could have been left off the project. And on a 10-song album, when 2 songs are that weak, it's definitely a bit of a detriment. But the other songs are so great that it definitely makes up for it. Sampha has definitely crafted his own style with this release. A lot of that can be chalked up to his very unique and lovely voice, but also just the range of influences he draws from. There's some soul on here, some electronica, some trip hop. I will say that this album is very front-loaded. Not that the tracks on the back end are bad, in fact they're really good. It's just that the first 4 tracks on this album are fantastic, and if the album had kept up that quality the whole way through, this would have been a lot higher on my list. But I'm not complaining, I'm really happy with what we got, and I see a lot of promise in Sampha going forward. At number 18, I have Compassion by Forest Swords. This is a really great electronic album, and my favorite thing about it is that it hardly sounds like an electronic album. These songs feel very natural. The drums don't feel stale like they're from a drum machine, they feel very authentic. There's some warm saxophones in here, and I love the way that he mixes vocal samples into some of these songs. This isn't an ambient album, but there's definitely elements of that worked in here, and it just creates some really beautiful, serene music. At number 17, I have Murder of the Universe by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. This is a concept album broken up into 3 chapters that each tell 3 different stories. I love the stories on here and the fantastical nature of them. There's some narration on here that may put some people off, but I personally love the flair it added to the record. You're still getting King Gizzard's signature mix of psych rock and garage rock. The instrumentals are all really high energy. I always love King Gizzard's guitar riffs. This is another really solid record from them. They're 2 for 2 so far this year, and I can't wait to hear their 3 remaining albums that they're apparently going to put out this year. At number 16, I have Forever by Code Orange. This is a great metalcore record. The vocals on here, they're thrashing, they're ferocious. The song composition is very dynamic. You're not just getting one guitar riff or one drum line just repeated for an entire song. There's a lot of progression, a lot of switch-ups. It makes each track a really exciting listen, and the record as a whole, it's abrasive, it's hard as nails, and it just straight up kicks ass. At number 15, I have Melodrama by Lorde. With her debut album Pure Heroin, it got a lot of critical and commercial success, but me personally, I liked that record, but I knew that Lorde can do better, and that's exactly what she did on her sophomore album Melodrama. I still love Lorde's beautiful smoky voice. I love the really dreamy atmosphere of this record. Lorde doesn't just fall into the mold of a typical pop star. In fact, a lot of the songs on here blatantly subvert pop stereotypes. Besides Greenlight and Perfect Places, none of the songs on here build up to some anthemic, radio-friendly chorus. A lot of this album is actually very subtle and very downplayed, and then you get into the writing of this album where I think it really shines. A lot of this album's content revolves around a relationship that Lorde had, one that failed. But we're not just hearing the same content over and over. On each track, she approaches it from a different angle. She's always talking about a different aspect of love or a different aspect of her relationship. There's some great imagery throughout this record. I love how she tackles complex emotions. At number 14, I have Goths by the Mountain Goats. On this record, the Mountain Goats set out to make a guitarless album, and that's exactly what they did. That is made up for by some wonderful keyboard, bass, piano, saxophone. The record does sound really great, but it's the heartfelt, in-depth exploration of goth culture that really makes this album feel special. The storytelling on this album is fantastic. I personally actually really don't know anything about goth culture, but that's the thing about this album. You don't need to appreciate it, because that's how effective the songwriting, and it draws you in whether you're familiar with this culture or not. At number 13, I have Big Fish Theory by Vince Staples. Vince Staples is one of my favorite modern day rappers, and that's because he never just wants to do the same old thing. He's always exploring new sounds, he's always trying new things, and that's exactly what he does on Big Fish Theory. I will say, some people are going out and saying that this album is like super futuristic, and I wouldn't go that far. I don't think it's that experimental, but Vince definitely is experimenting on here, and it really pays off. I mean, he got Sophie on production on 2 of these songs, which makes for 2 of the craziest and best songs on the album in my opinion. The 2 skits on this record could have definitely been left off, but the actual songs, honestly, I love them all. Vince on here is doing what he always does. He comes through with some really creative flows, his content is brutally honest, and his bars are cutthroat. At number 12, I have Brutalism by Idols, and there's not much to say about this one other than that it's just a fantastic punk record. Once again, like with Remo Drive, they're not reinventing the genre here, but they just do it so well. So many of the riffs and lyrics and choruses still get stuck in my head. I do return to this album quite often, especially when I'm working out. It's a great workout album. The lyrics on here are blunt, they're political, they're brutally honest, and this record has a very dirty and grimy feel, which is exactly what you want from any punk record. 2017 has definitely been a weak year for hip-hop so far. Of the 20 albums that are on this list, only 3 of them are hip-hop records. That's not to say that there aren't any other good ones, you know. Sadistic, The Underachievers, Your Old Droog, they all put out some really solid records this year, but just there hasn't been that much that's really felt special. And I know that most other people are probably going to have Damn somewhere on their lists. Personally, I don't like that album much at all. I'm not going to get into that here, not at all, that's not the point. But I'm just saying that even with that included, you know, there's just not that much in hip-hop this year that's really worth talking about or coming back to. But Chill Dummy by P.O.S. is definitely one of the best things to come out of hip-hop this year. This record has a very distinct sound, but it's kind of hard to describe why. You know, songs like Bully and Born a Snake would be pretty easy to explain because the production on those is very experimental. But as for a lot of the other beats on here, they definitely have a familiar aesthetic to them if you listen to a lot of underground hip-hop. But I don't know, something about them makes them feel very unique to this one project. And P.O.S. on here is spitting his ass off, but if you've heard his music before, that should be no surprise. All the features on this thing, they come through too with excellent verses. And the closing track on this record is one of the most epic outros to an album that I've heard all this year. This thing is just an 8-minute bar fest with plenty of guests to contribute, but P.O.S. himself has a lot of verses on this thing to let you know that this still is his song. So to any hip-hop fans out there who are frustrated with how weak 2017 has been, go give this album a listen. I can't promise that you'll like it, but for the people that it does hit, I think they'll really love it. And now we're down to the top 10, and to kick it off, at number 10, I have Hang by Foxygen. This record only has 8 tracks, but each one is extremely lavish, is extravagant, is extremely instrumentally dense. You know, Foxygen, they got a whole orchestra on this thing. There's just so many different instruments and sounds, and it all sounds extremely lush and gorgeous, maybe even a bit over the top. You know, I've definitely seen some people say they don't really like this record because they find it a bit cheesy, and I can see that, but personally, I just love every track on here. When songs are this instrumentally dense, I have a hard time not loving it because there's just never a dull moment. Every song on here is great, which is important because it's only 8 songs, so there can't be any weak spots, and thankfully there's not. I love the 70s flair to this record. I just love everything about it. Like I said, a lot of people, they might not like this, but personally, I can't get enough of this record. At number 9, I have Crack Up by Fleet Foxes. This is another album with extremely rich and beautiful instrumentation. They don't have a whole orchestra on here like Foxygen did, but every song on here is sprawling and whimsical. On a musical level, I can't see anyone not liking this record. I rank this album over Foxygen though because this record also has fantastic lyrics. Cassius tells a story about police brutality, and 3rd of May is about the hardships that have gone on in the relationship between 2 of Fleet Fox's members. This This is a very fascinating song, and with this album, Fleet Foxes are now 3 for 3 when it comes to putting out amazing records. At number 8, I have No Shape by Perfume Genius. This is such a great art rock album. When I did my review of this, I said that songs like Braid, Valley, and Every Night were a bit dull, but here's the thing, I've gone back and listened to those songs individually, and those are great songs. It's just that in the context of the record, there's even more incredible songs that make great songs feel dull. That's how good this album is. I mentioned earlier that hip-hop has had a weak year in 2017, but music in general, this has been a fantastic year for music. There's just so many incredible moments on this record, from the magical, shimmering synth bursts on Other Side, to Mike Hadrius' extremely memorable, raw, and breathy vocal performance on Die For You, to the glamorous, punchy, single-ready songs like Wreath and Slip Away. The fact that this album is only number 8 on my list just shows you how many amazing records we've gotten this year. At number 7, I have Forget by Shoo Shoo. I love the really dark, gothic vibe of a lot of this record. This is some really great experimental pop. In my perfect world, this is the type of music that would get radio play, but in the world that we currently live in, this is probably the farthest thing that pop music can get from getting radio play. This just goes to show that you can make really odd, harsh music that is still very catchy. At number 6, I have the self-titled record from Arca. I don't even know how to explain this one, so I'm going to try to use a comparison here. I don't know if this is going to make any sense at all, but this is just the best way that I can describe this album. If any of you have ever seen the movie American Beauty, Wes Bentley's character in that movie, Ricky Fitz, is a very strange guy, and he finds beauty in the most weird things. He tells a story at one point about how he saw a homeless woman who was froze to death, and how that was one of the most beautiful things he's ever seen. And so at the end of the movie, when Lester has just been shot in the head and is lying on the counter, laying in his own pool of blood, and then Ricky comes in the room and he looks at him for a while and then he smiles, and we know that to Ricky this is probably one of the most beautiful things he's ever seen. And what I'm trying to say here is that when listening to this album, I feel like Ricky Fitz in this moment. This album, it feels tortured, it's twisted, it's a bit off-putting, it's extremely weird, but something about it is just so beautiful. I can say that this is maybe the most unique album I've heard all year. Unless someone wants to point me towards a whole section of music that I'm just completely missing out on, I personally have never heard anything like this. This album is the epitome of something that is definitely not for everyone. I cannot promise anyone that they will like this album, but what I can promise them is that they've probably never heard anything like this. At number 5, I have A Crow Looked at Me by Mount Eerie, and with this record, it's kind of difficult, and the reason why, if you haven't heard it, is because Phil Elverum, the guy behind Mount Eerie, he wrote this album after the death of his wife, and that is what this album is all about. It's about death, it's about dealing with the death of loved ones, and it's heartbreaking, it's soul crushing. If you listen to this album and you don't feel anything, then you're probably just you're heartless. The lyrics on here are so incredibly just sad, and they're powerful though. That's the thing about this record, is that even though it's hard to listen to, you can't deny how incredible of a piece of art that this is. Just the exploration of death, it's so raw, it's so real. This album is such a visceral experience. It is dark, it is hard to listen to. When art can be this powerful, that's when you know it's good. And this is a wonderful piece of art. And so listening to this album, I can't do it often because obviously it's hard, but I appreciate it. But it is hard. It's not for everyone. It is soul crushing, like I've said, but if you want to give it a listen, it's a powerful piece of art. At number 4, I have Common as Light and Love Are Red Valleys of Blood by Sun Kill Moon. I've said it plenty of times before in this video, and I'll say it once again, this record is not going to be for everybody. Mark Kozlik, the guy behind Sun Kill Moon, there's just so many things he's doing on this that is just gonna, it's not gonna be for a lot of people. First of all, just, his vocal style, his vocal delivery, it's a near spoken word on a lot of this tracks. He's not, you can barely call what he's doing singing. Me though, I really enjoy his vocal style, and I think it works really well over the instrumentals on here. Another thing is that this record is over 2 hours long, so it's probably gonna test a lot of people's patience. But for me personally, it took me a while to get to this because it was hard for me to find 2 hours to put aside. But I was on an 8-hour bus ride, and so I was like, this is a perfect time to try this album out. and I listened to it 3 times in a row because, yeah, it's long, but to me, it never gets boring. So much so that I wanted to listen to it for pretty much 6.5 hours straight. The lyrics, though, is what really makes this record. So if you're not a lyrics person, right off the bat, don't even bother listening to this because there's no way you're gonna like it. But for me, what this album feels like to me is it feels like an intimate evening with Mark Koslick. I feel like I'm sitting in a room with him for 2 hours and 10 minutes as he just tells me a bunch of stories about his life over the past couple of years. Just the lyrical structure of these songs is very unique. It's like I'm taking a trip through his mind because each song does have one main topic, but he veers off in so many different directions. It's like we're actually seeing his thoughts and his thought process just put right into music. We feel his mind wander and then come back to his original thought. And I also appreciate about this record is just based on the dates of things he's describing, it seems that this record is actually sequenced in the order that he recorded these songs. So even though there's a lot of messiness and randomness and spontaneousness in the lyrics, it does feel like we're going from point A to point B, so there's something to hold on to. Admittedly, this is my first time ever listening to a Sun Kil Moon album, but through this album alone, I feel like I know Mark Koslick, and that's the thing. If you listen to this record, you may hate the vocal style, you may hate the lyrical structure, you may not even be a fan of the instrumentals on here, but I don't think anybody's going to deny that Mark Koslick is an amazing storyteller. At number 3, I have Saturation by Brockhampton. This might only be my third favorite record of the year, but I can tell you that it's easily my most played album of the year. This album has so much replay value for me, man. I love this record. Brockhampton brings something really special to the table with this one. Just speaking of the members themselves, they all have their own unique style, so they're all bringing something new to the table, something fresh. This isn't the Migos situation where we basically have the same guy just cloned 3 times, rapping on a song. Each one actually brings their own unique flair to each track, but they also all have fantastic chemistry with one another. They're all bringing their own personal stories too, so we're getting a lot of great content throughout this record. And musically, these guys are definitely taking some risks on here. The production front to back is fantastic. Brockhampton is playing with so many different sounds and flavors on here. This is such a colorful record. And when they do decide to experiment on songs like Bank or Bump or Cash, the experimentation to me paid off exceptionally well. And this record is also filled to the brim with extremely memorable lyrics and just so many quotables. Everything I could ask for in a hip-hop project and more is on this record. I can't get enough of it. At number 2, I have The Underside of Powers by Algiers. Algiers is back once again with an incredibly potent record. They still have their extremely unique style with their blend of industrial, gospel, and post-punk. I said it a lot in my review, I'll reiterate it now. Nobody sounds like these guys, and their style, it sounds like it could get a bit crazy, but it just works so naturally. The sound of their music alone is enough to make me love it, but then you add on top of that their lead singer, Franklin James Fisher, who is an absolute powerhouse. Every vocal performance he gives on this record is stunning, and the group's revolutionary and political lyrics are extremely engaging. And the thing is that I love most about it is you actually have to dig into their lyrics to see what they're saying. They're not just surface level, they're not just straightforward, which sometimes that can work when you're just aiming to be really blunt. But what Algiers does, they actually make you think. They're incredible songwriters. These guys are the entire package. Both their debut album and this one are both fantastic. These guys are already one of my favorite groups of this decade, and whatever they do next, I am psyched for it. And finally, my favorite album of 2017 so far, one that I'm not sure if this can be topped, honestly. I have a hard time seeing any album that can top this one, but it is Pure Comedy by Father John Misty. The instrumentation on this album is just so lush and gorgeous, but once again, it's the lyrics that make this album, to me, incredible. The songwriting on this thing is complex, it's intricate, it's perfectly framed. Father John Misty on here is portraying our current state of humanity as pure comedy. He views our struggles and hardships as almost some type of a cruel joke, just because we've kind of brought all this onto ourselves. And yet we can't figure out how to solve any of these problems, and all throughout this record, Father John Misty, he's tackling all sorts of different aspects of today's society where we are just completely screwing up. Father John Misty, he's judgmental towards this all, he's just laughing at it. He even does try to provide some potential solutions sometimes, but the best thing about this album is on the last track how it recontextualizes everything. On that last track, he's saying that humans are just so inconsequential and that none of these problems really even matter because in the grand grand scheme of things, we are just all specks on a speck on a speck. You know, in the grand scheme of the universe, we are nothing. And to him, that is the true comedy of it all, is that all these things that seem so big to us, they don't even really matter. Having to quickly describe the concept of the album to you, it may make it sound simple, but I'm not doing it justice. You really have to listen to it because it really is super dense and really complex and intricate lyrically. And you really just have to experience it for yourself to see that. Every time I listen to this thing, it hits me hard, it floors me. I'm super impressed by it every time. I just think this album is brilliant and it's my favorite of the year so far. But yeah, that's my list. Those are my 20 favorite albums of 2017 so far. And I've been recording for 2 hours. Hopefully the video doesn't turn out that long. I know this will be a longer video though, so thank you to anyone who did stick around to the end. And guys, leave your list down in the comment section below. I love seeing other people's lists. I can get good recommendations from them, and it's just cool to see what other people think of this year so far. I know there's plenty of albums on my list that will not be on yours. There's going to be plenty of albums on your list that probably didn't make mine, so leave them down in the comment section below. Like I just said, thank you very much for watching this, and I can't wait to see what the rest of 2017 has in store musically. And, you know, see you guys next time.